finding therapists is a bit like dating. Yeah, you gotta also just sense the energy.
Never encourage anyone to put whipped cream on garbage. Never encourage a positive affirmation or a positive reframe until you know what's underneath that.
We often force ourselves to never have a negative thought, or like we're not allowed to feel sad or angry. But that's actually the joy of being human.
This may be controversial. I don't know if everyone needs therapy.
Welcome to Well Enough, the podcast from The Independent that helps make sense of the weird world of wellness and answers the big health questions we're all asking. I'm your host, Emily Lavinia, and together with my guests, we'll be unpacking trends, myth-busting, and making sense of the wellbeing boom. Today we're discussing therapy, mental health, and whether we're receiving too much or not enough validation when it comes to our feelings. I'm joined by two people who are experts on our emotional selves, the power of the mind, and how to support it better. Ailey Jolie is a chartered psychologist. She's an expert on the mind-body connection, and she's a specialist in trauma processing. Her work explores the power of embodiment, self-compassion, and moving beyond what we think we know about ourselves. Maya Raichoora is the UK's leading expert on visualization and mental fitness. She teaches elite athletes and high-powered executives how to become more resilient, and her book, Visualize, teaches us how to think, feel, and perform like the top 1%. Maya, Ailey, thank you so much for joining me for Well Enough.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you both on the sofa. So we're going to talk about a subject today that is quite difficult and in many ways quite hard to unpack. We're going to be talking about mental health and therapy. Everyone is probably very familiar with the idea of therapy by now because we have experienced this boom in the way that we talk about mental health. We're encouraged to talk about mental health, but there's still somewhat, I think, of a stigma around talking about our feelings. And that might be because as Brits, we're quite closed and we struggle with this kind of thing. But why do you think it is so difficult for us to maybe get into therapy or even talk about our feelings in the first place?
One of the reasons why I perceive and believe it's so hard for people to get into therapy and talk about their feelings is, one, we receive absolutely no education around it. There isn't a program, and it's not integrated into our learning systems to actually have the capacity and the ability to go, what is that sensation I'm feeling inside myself? Oh, the emotion of anger makes me act like this. That type of intentionality and pause isn't integrated into our learning system. So when someone comes to therapy and they really want to express how they feel, I'm always like, we have to take a step back and really acknowledge that there's this big learning curve of learning how to do this. And oftentimes that requires really unlearning a lot of the things that we've picked up around emotions, around feeling. Let that be from culture or our own family system. And so when someone is really struggling with that first initial step, I think there's such a space there to actually provide psychoeducation like I just did there, but also some cultural education around the systems that we're in and how emotions and feelings have been framed by our external world.
So we kind of get in our own way a little bit, don't we? And I suppose, Maya, you've got a lot of experience of speaking with people who struggle with being in their own way and don't necessarily have the tools to be able to move past what they think they know about themselves.
I think this is the crux of the problem we're in at the moment. And it's why I term myself a mental fitness expert. Because again and again, I was on panels and people would ask me to explain why mental health was important. And I just found it a really irrelevant question because we'd never question if your physical health is important. We know that. And I found that it was like talking about, running is important for you, but if you don't go on the run, it doesn't make a difference. And so for me, I think with the mind and with a lot of these practices, whether it's managing emotions, building your confidence, self-awareness, action is super important. And I think we're a little bit stuck in just talking about it. But I really urge that consideration of, well, what can I do about this? How can I actually invest in those tools? I grew up in the UK. But I'm South Asian. So my family is, born and raised in Kenya, then India. And what I found is that whilst we were able to have emotions, it was considered quite weak. And so I always remember, if I cried, it would be like, oh, just stop crying. We got to move on quite quickly. And honestly, sometimes it really helped. You just got on with life, and that's why we probably have very good work ethics. But I didn't realize I was suppressing so much of that. And it's heavy. It's really heavy. And again, it's because I just didn't have the awareness, but also the tools. Because I think it's one thing to say, oh, hey, I'm feeling really angry. But it's another thing to be like, well, do I need to do anything about it? How do I process that? How do I just sit in the mud with it? I think we're quite scared of doing that. Whether you are 5-year-old, whether you are 50, whether you are an elite athlete, we all have those limitations, but it doesn't mean they have to stop us necessarily.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting what you said there, Maya, about the fact that we can sometimes be perceived as being weak if we admit that we are struggling. I felt that myself, growing up. I felt that if I admitted that I felt a bit sad or a bit anxious, then people were going to think less of me, or I wasn't going to get the same opportunities. And I've, been having therapy for almost a decade now, and it's changed my life and really helped me. So I'm always quite nervous when people talk about being perceived as weak, because actually therapy has made me a lot stronger, a lot more resilient. And I've done so many different types. There's CBT, there's talking therapy, there's psychodynamic, there's internal family systems. I suppose a lot of people, when they think therapy, they might just think lying on a couch, talking to someone who's listening. But there are all these different styles, and it is a very modern practice now. Ailey, I wonder if you can maybe explain for the listener who might not necessarily know what therapy is or what a big umbrella it is, what the different types are and how they differ and how they might be applicable for some people but not for others.
I love that you included this question of the different types of therapy and the different styles, because I am a clinician who has training from the States, Canada, the UK, Europe, Australia. I've worked in different countries. And so I also supervise therapists or mentor therapists from different countries. And what that allows me to see is how much the culture actually impacts the training and this practice. And I remember when I came to the UK and I myself was looking for a therapist, and I sat down across from this beautifully credentialed therapist, but they were so cold with me. And they were so reserved and reflective, validating, but I didn't know who they were in the room. And I had the wisdom, because I am a therapist, to know, okay, this is someone who comes from a more behavioral background, meaning cognitive behavioral therapy, which really looks at your cognition. Okay, these are your thoughts. I'll change my behavior. My thinking will change, such forth is the theory. But they also come from a more Freudian background. I have a master's degree in depth psychology. I know Freud intimately. But I also know for myself that humanistic aspect and the relational aspect, which is more present in North America and how we're trained. We are trained to bring more of us in the room, meaning we use self-disclosure in a really precise and articulate way. When we are feeling like the client would actually benefit from knowing you're really not alone. I've been through something maybe a little bit similar. I'll center myself and then I'll move deeply out of the way so we stay with your process. That practice, even in the UK, is not as present in therapists. And so I always say to people when they're looking for a therapist to get really curious about what they're really looking for. Are we looking for strategies? Cognitive behavioral therapy is going to be amazing. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, some of these more behavioral techniques. But if we're looking for more of that relational aspect where we want to feel felt or we want to feel challenged or we know that there's something from our past that we can't remember and we have all this sticky shame, look for someone who has more of those modern approaches as they're framed here in the UK, like internal family systems or a somatic approach. And so it's just also getting into the awareness that there are all of these different types. And actually, what's most important is finding your fit, which means trying out different approaches, reading the books before you go, because it is expensive to go try out lots of different therapists, just getting a little tidbit so that you get clarity around what's most important. Is it some techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy? There's a relational aspect to that too. Or is it more of that felt sense, which you're going to get with more of a somatic practitioner?
So if you're comfortable to, would you tell me about your first experience of therapy?
When you ask that question, two experiences actually go through my mind. And why I differentiate them is because of the accessibility, and one being more short-term and one being more long-term. And so I actually accessed therapy for the first time when I was quite young. It was an art therapist. I was about 4 years old, and I got pulled out, and they kind of knew something was going on. And so I had this journey throughout my adolescence of engaging with therapy, but always more short-term. Later in my early 20s, I always think of my first therapist really being at a trauma center that actually Gabor Mate, who's quite famous now, he was the clinical director of that trauma therapy center. And why I think of that as my first kind of therapeutic experience, even though I had been in and out of therapy for most of my young adult life, is because that was the first time I felt really seen and met and understood by a therapist. And I had dabbled a lot. And I think there is this dabbling when we are trying to find a therapist. There's this assumption that if they have the credentials, they'll be the right fit, and therefore I'll really experience and benefit from this practice. But actually, it's all about finding the right relationship. And if you don't find that, everything that the therapist is offering might be helpful, but it won't actually allow you to get to really where you want to go, or to resolve the things that led you into that room originally. And so I've had, both the experience of short-term therapy and that being beneficial, and then also this later experience that I always kind of hold as more of my first therapeutic experience, because it was the first time I felt met and really acknowledged. And so I always invite people, if therapy hasn't felt right, to keep trying, because there is someone that will feel like a fit. And when you have that fit, then all of the credentials and the training and all of that stuff that is really needed to support someone in their mental health if they're struggling can shine and really take them to where they want to go.
I totally agree with you. Everything just slots into place, doesn't it? And I've had that same experience where I had a therapist, my first therapist, who just made sense to me. I felt like she really understood me. She really knew what I was going through, and she was really able to help. A few years later, when I returned to therapy, I went for someone with exactly the same credentials, the same process. Didn't click, wasn't a fit. It just didn't feel like this person could help me. So that connection is so important, and really good advice.
Just to add to that point, I think therapy or finding therapists is a bit like dating.
Yeah,
like you gotta also just sense the energy. Sometimes if you don't feel safe enough, or you just don't vibe with someone, you're also allowed to do it based on that. And I found that was important for me as well. So my first experience of it was actually in university, but I'd gone for a very specific reason. I knew I was struggling, and a lot of it was to do with the illness I was going through at the time, because I think, no one can really prepare you mentally or physically for what that's going to do. But also, I didn't stay in therapy for that long. I'd done a lot of the unraveling in the therapy, and I wanted to move forward, hence why I then ended up going down the coaching route. But I definitely started because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. For a long time, I did the whole self-therapy thing. And actually, on this note, I saw an article that said that now young people are using ChatGPT as a therapist, like a lot. And I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this as well. Because, out of curiosity, I also tried. I was like, well, what does it say? And it is interesting, isn't it? Because we all just want that bit of a support system, or someone to even just bounce our thoughts, feelings onto. And I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, because obviously I don't think ChatGPT is trained in that. I don't know. But it's interesting because people clearly want it. And whether we can make it a thing where, like you said, therapy doesn't have to mean you have to be in a room and you're like crying on a sofa. You can do therapeutic activities is also important. But that was my initial experience. And then I moved more into coaching. But I think you've got to ask yourself, what do I need right now? And what is going to help me?
Absolutely. And I am fascinated by AI therapists. Yeah. When I wrote my big piece about the wellness trends to know for 2025, one of the big ones was AI therapists and AI coaches, because I am seeing so much of this. We've covered it a lot with The Independent, and I'm also receiving pitches daily about people who now have almost a weird sort of codependent relationship with AI as a therapist.
Yeah.
And also, therapists telling me why, in some ways, this is a good thing, because of huge waiting lists and, the ability to outsource. and therapists telling me why this is really insidious and why there is a real dark shadow around this, which is why we should potentially be quite wary. I think, Ailey, you can probably speak to that as a qualified therapist. What are your thoughts on it?
I actually am not so worried about it. And I've had lots of people come to me and be like, would you be interested in being in our startup? Or like, how could we take this technique of therapy that you're trained in and bridge it over?
So people want to turn you into an AI therapist almost, use you as a learning model.
Of course, yeah.
Fascinating.
Which is an interesting business proposition. But to me, it just seems so silly. It's like you don't understand what therapy is. Therapy is a relationship in which slowly we build trust over time, where there is enough safety in the room. It's not going to be fully safe, where someone else starts to see your darkest shadowy pieces and can support you in starting to understand how that is moving your life. And ideally, therapy, and this is a giant misconception, is that therapy isn't forward thinking. It is deeply forward thinking when we have gone back into enough of the shadow and the past and we stay with the process where it moves us into how we change into our future. And so when I have someone who comes, okay, would you want to make like a therapeutic coaching chatbot? I'm like, but it's not going to be therapy. This is maybe an amazing tool and I can support you in that, in it being therapeutic in some intent. But therapy is a relationship with a person. And that is actually what people want to receive, which I think is a huge part of why there has been this emergence of more people kind of engaging in therapy and being interested about it, is because they have heard that story from that friend who went, who felt deeply seen or held or understood or accessed a part of them that they had buried a very long time away. And why that happened is through the power of relationship. And the more we have AI and technology and all of these other distractions, the more each and every single one of us is craving relationship because we are biologically hardwired to want connection to someone else.
It's quite worrying, isn't it, when we do think about, especially the prevalence in young people using AI to outsource thoughts, feelings. They're using it as a confidant. They're using it in some cases as, their only source of therapy. We are perhaps building a society where we are much, much lonelier, which is one of the reasons in the first place that everyone is saying they've got mental health issues. So it's quite ironic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. When I look at it, I'm like, oh, we're just kind of going around this loop. And I really value the intent behind these people wanting to make therapy more accessible, because therapy isn't accessible. It's a very privileged practice, but I don't necessarily put that burden on therapists to be more accessible. I put that more on our systems, our corporations, and our cultures to go, how, if our corporate statement is that we want our employees to be well, how can we integrate therapy into their well-being? Not an AI chatbot. How can we actually make relationships central to the foundation of our business, because we know that that supports well-being, and therefore we'll have more productive workers?
Well, a lot of what you do, Maya, is actually stepping into corporate space, isn't it? And bringing the tools that you have into those spaces so that people do feel more confident, more well adjusted, which is something that, wouldn't have existed a few years ago.
I think one thing we struggle with the most, and you mentioned it with the loneliness thing, is I think because the society we live in, we always want the solution like yesterday. And you see it, right? If you want a takeout, you can get it in like half an hour. You want something, you just, Amazon it, and it's there on your doorstep tomorrow. I think in the same way, when we look at our own relationships, our mental states, our emotions, we also want it solved tomorrow. We don't like sitting in the discomfort of it. And so whenever I do go into corporates, or even just anyone, I think the first thing is you've got to look at that relationship with yourself, because if you're always just trying to fix it and solve it immediately, we actually lose the beauty and the complexity of what it means to be human. And I think emotions are a really good example, where you do sometimes just have to sit in the mud for a bit, honor it, and be okay with being a little bit uncomfortable. But so many people I speak to get so scared of it. And there's one session I do with corporates that's literally power over emotions, right? And they all choose to avoid it. They're all like, oh, no, we don't need this, we're fine. And it's funny because no one likes to like address it with me. Once they learn more about it and they learn actually you can be playful with it. And obviously a lot of the work I do with like creative visualization, it uses imagery and characters and animals to actually see your emotion and then process it. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. We don't like being in that little bit of pain. And I think that then shows because these things will keep coming up. The same patterns, triggers, limitations, if we are just avoiding it. I get a lot of people saying like, oh, I just want to stop feeling this like as soon as possible. And I like ask them to reframe it. Take ASAP and make it as slow as possible or as sustainable as possible, as steady as possible. That's going to be way more beneficial and advantageous for your mind, body, and your health. And you know, when I looked at the research for successful entrepreneurs and high performers, emotional intelligence was the number one predictor of success over skill and talent. So it doesn't matter how clever you are or how many times you get promoted. If you don't know how to manage your emotions, how to lead yourself, how are you meant to lead others, or how are you meant to go into work and genuinely feel fulfilled and good in yourself? So I think it's a big thing, and I don't solve all of it. But I think even just starting to change the narrative of it is important. So it's not just a tick box exercise. It's something that they invest in just like they would public speaking or communication or coding skills, mental fitness, emotional intelligence. It's just another skill that is going to give them the edge and the advantage in life.
I think it's really interesting that you mention emotional intelligence because this has become a real buzzword, especially in the world of dating. So you hear a lot of people saying, if you're not in therapy, I won't date you. If you're not doing the work, then forget it. Yeah,
wow.
and I come from a background of intimacy coaching and writing about dating. So for me, I would see that a lot. And I would see people saying, I won't date anyone who's not in therapy. Forget it. Wow. And so therapy has almost become this incredibly important aspect to people's personalities. Having emotional intelligence, cultivating emotional intelligence has become something that's central to the dating experience. But I think that's also a double-edged sword because it also implies that anyone who's not in therapy is maybe not good enough. And although I think we think of therapy as something to aspire to and something that is great, I think you touched on this earlier, Ailey, not everyone can access it. It is something that can be expensive. It's something that certainly in this country we struggle with nationalised mental health services and waiting lists. And I think possibly the idea that I won't date you if you're not in therapy can be a little bit, almost a little bit insidious because we want to think of ourselves as developing, growing, becoming better people, becoming more attuned, more resilient, better emotional intelligence. But we're also insinuating that anyone that's not doing that work is not really on the same footing as us or not really as good as us. But I wonder with that, does everyone even need it? If we think, well, if you're not doing it, I'm better than you, or, I'm doing the work and you're not, maybe that person doesn't even need therapy. Maybe they're fine just as they are. Do you think that it works for everyone and everyone actually needs it?
This may be controversial or not the expected opinion of someone who is a therapist and has benefited from therapy quite deeply, but I don't know if everyone needs therapy. I think there are so many different ways to gain somatic literacy, so an awareness of the sensations in my body and what they mean for me, to gain emotional access, so I can actually access my emotions and I can choose to put it over here when I need to, and I can choose to process it when I need to. There are so many different practices. And I think to say that someone needs to be in therapy to be worthy of me being in connection really actually gets into some quite oppressive ideologies. We have to look at the therapy of practice and where it comes from, which is traditionally white heterosexual men. And then we have to look at the language of trauma and who they were writing for, which was white heterosexual traumatized women. And so the language of therapy is quite femme-centered. I work predominantly with men. No one would ever guess that from my media, how I present online or my media. But it's because I use language really intentionally to actually give access to men. And so when we think of therapy and say everyone should be there, we're really minimizing all of the barriers that are around this practice and not acknowledging there are so many other ways to have a relationship that is safe and supportive and challenging and compassionate and caring and provides you with the container needed to really ask deeper questions of yourself around how you want to live and who you really are.
Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Do I think everyone needs to have therapy? No, but I do really agree with you that there is this pressure to keep improving all the time. And in some ways does it take us away from just being a human being where we just be present, be content? Because actually sometimes you can go the other way, right? You always are just then on to the next thing. And there are extremities in the wellness space that I think can actually do more harm than good. And that's why I think it does come back to that thing of self-awareness. And one thing I would say, and I don't know if you find this, because as much as there's so many therapies out there and so many options, I think that in itself is the overwhelming part, because no one knows where to start. Everyone's like, well, should I do this? Or my friend's doing this. Maybe I need to, go and see a doctor. And I think because we are drowning in all these options and all this information, and, you see one video on social media and oh my gosh, this is me. I'm going to label myself and I've got this disorder, whatever it might be. Again, we're just becoming more and more separate from actually listening to our own minds and our own bodies. And that's why I think the first form of therapy anyone should ever do is sit on your own in a room for 10 minutes with your mind, with your body, and just listen. We are scared of our own thoughts and our own feelings. That's sad. And actually, that's probably the first place to start. Just try and connect with yourself. And yes, you may need help. Let's say if you feel like you can't do that, great. Maybe it's let me reach out to someone or see if actually I can read something about it. There is a lot there, but I'd say first go a little bit inward if you can and spend a bit of time with yourself. And if you find that overwhelming, go on a solo date. I go on one every month. Just spend time on your own, whether you're going for dinner, not on your phone, by the way. A lot of people say to me, oh yeah, I spent time on my own, and they're just sitting in front of their TV on their phone. I'm like, that's not it. That's just not it. So really learn to spend time and quality time dating yourself so that you can learn more about perhaps what you might need.
I think that's really good advice, and certainly something that I try to do. I do try to find still moments where I can think about how I'm feeling, what thoughts are going through my mind. I think for a lot of people it's tricky to put the phone down, isn't it? But it's certainly something that we could all benefit from doing. And you also mentioned, Maya, the idea that well-being can become a little bit competitive, and we can think we must be optimizing all the time, we must be developing ourselves. And I see this as quite a pervasive problem in well-being. But I also see social media kind of feeding into that, and the way that we are constantly online, looking at what other people are doing, thinking about therapy through the lens of TikTok or Instagram. And we also see the lingo of therapy and self-development, the buzzwords popping up a lot, to the extent that perhaps they've lost a little bit of meaning. We've seen, certainly in celebrity media, a lot of cases of people almost weaponizing the language of therapy and talking about boundaries, talking about holding space, talking about things in ways that actually seem quite out of context. And I think now we're finding it maybe quite hard to separate therapy speak and performative therapy, and the idea that we're turning up on an Instagram live and talking about how healed we are from the actual process of therapy and of healing. I don't know whether, Ailey, you have any thoughts on sort of performative therapy and therapy speak versus the real thing?
No, I don't believe anyone is doing it well and with a poor intention. Everyone is very well intended. But one of the things that you get through going through a graduate program and sitting with clients and having to do the registration body, one of the solid foundations that any clinician, at least in North America, I wasn't fully trained here, so I don't know, but I do believe it holds true, is you're really trained to examine your language. Because you say one wrong word with a client, and you don't know what you've pressed or how you've hurt them. And so there's this intentional language always used. And when, pop psychology started to take therapeutic language and kind of commodify it and make it more commercial, we lost one of the main things that makes therapy so effective, which is sitting across from someone who knows language and how to structure language in such a way to create space and openness and just touch your button just enough that you feel challenged, but not so challenged that you're defensive. And so I bring this in because I have it all of the times with my clients. They're like, well, I was on this date or I was sitting with this person and they were totally gaslighting me and and I'm like, okay, what does gaslighting feel like in your body? Silence. They don't know. They read me the definition. They're like, well, they did this and then this, and that's gaslighting. I'm like, no. The words is great. Fluency is important, but it's actually depth of awareness. That's more important here. And so it's actually learning, okay, what does manipulation or gaslighting or holding a boundary feel like inside myself? That is more important than having the story of language, because it can be weaponized and it has been weaponized. And I hear that in my clients, and it's something I'm constantly trying to unpick. Boundaries is a huge one. And everyone's like, well, this is my boundary. And I go, okay, but boundary is actually, how do I stay in honest relationship with myself while still being in honest relationship with you? A barrier to connection is saying hard no, and this is where I end and you begin. That's totally fine. But a boundary still has a relational component to it. And so I actually now spend a lot of time with my clients really unpicking language in a way that I didn't 7 years ago. And it's like I have to kind of go back and be like, okay, when you say you were manipulated, what do you mean? Or when you say they're narcissistic, okay, we have to have a conversation around diagnoses and spectrums and parts of self.
Yeah, I do certainly think it's in some ways it's so useful that we all now have the language to call a spade, because I remember a few years ago, I didn't necessarily have the toolkit to be able to express myself as well as I can now when it comes to issues on mental health. But if I have to read the words gaslighting one more time in relation to something that is actually not necessarily an example of that, you start to think maybe words have lost their meaning a little bit and therefore they're not helpful for us. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that, Maya.
Let's use the example of, like nerves and excitement, right? I know a lot of people say, it's basically the same energy, it's just how you use it. It's kind of true, because ultimately it's either excess energy or quite like, there's heat in your body. But if you see it as nerves, it's going to completely change your performance and change how you maybe suppress it or deal with it. If you see it as excitement, you might use it in a different way. And I love that, so Sadhguru, he, the spiritual leader, he says that, why don't we just not label the emotion as good or bad? Because often people be like, oh, I'm feeling a really bad emotion. But on whose accord? Why is shame a bad emotion? It's just an emotion. And I think when you take off this judgment, and again, sometimes our language is a little bit of a limitation because it puts you in that box or that particular narrative quite quickly. And you just see it as, okay, it's an emotion I am experiencing or I'm feeling. Cool. You give yourself a bit more space or curiosity to think, well, what can I do with this? If it's just energy in my body. And so that's where I see language maybe playing a really important role.
I think the whole idea that you've touched on there of reframing is basically the crux, isn't it, of what we talk about when we talk about how to think about your own thoughts, how to think about mental health. And often when I speak to people about therapy, it all boils down to the fact that they're doing it because they want to think differently. They've got a lot of thoughts, but they want to shift them. They want to reframe them. They want to turn them into something that's positive rather than negative, quite similarly in the way that you talk about language. And I think for many people, it's so possible. But also, I think you touched on this earlier, Ailey, it's quite difficult to know how to find someone who will help you do that. If someone is a complete beginner, how on earth are they going to understand where to start? How are they going to know who to speak to when it comes to changing their mind, when it comes to thinking positively rather than negatively? Do you have any advice at all for someone who thinks, okay, I need to shift the way I think, but I don't know where to start?
for the person who wants to shift how they're thinking, but they don't know where to start, I would initially really guide them into some curiosity around how those thoughts are impacting their life, right? So is it just a thought that's going on in my head and I'm ruminating and therefore I'm not engaging in my life, or I'm constantly using my device? But starting to look into where has that cognitive rumination, the thought, manifested into action that is causing a sore spot in my own reality. And then I think once you have that identified, you actually have a lot more information on the practice, the technique. Let that be therapy, let that be something else that is going to support you in that way. And once you have that piece, then it's a little bit of like a journey backwards and a journey inwards, because we know our thoughts are repetitive. They come from our history, from our intergenerational history. We have narratives in our mind that don't even belong to us. They belong to culture or our grandmother or this, that thing, and that's way out there. And then that's where some of the curiosity goes even deeper of how can I start to explore that piece? And is it simply reframing that I need, or is there another piece that's missing? And that's why I bring in that piece of like, where is it causing the sore spot in your life? Because that could be quite solved, if I use that word, by moving your body, by sitting and breathing, by picking up a pen and paper and drawing. Because sometimes there are aspects of our human experience that cannot be reframed. They just need to be expressed, or they need to be witnessed, and not necessarily by someone else either. And so that's where I always get curious, because I hear people say this, like, I want to come to therapy to change my thoughts, or like, I'm here because I have this thought. And I'm like, okay, but how is that playing out in real time? Because that will give us the most information of how I can actually support you, or what will be most supportive for you.
That's really good advice. I do think as well, you're right, that we sometimes forget tiny habits can make a big impact. And I suppose you talk a lot about this in your work, Maya, because the idea that you are taking small steps to change the way you show up in life is a big part of the way that you coach and the way that you work with the sorts of people that you do.
Yeah, as in, if you want to change anything in your life, whether that's your thinking, your performance, your behavior, start so small that it's so hard not to do it. And that could literally mean, so one of the smallest habits I do that's actually been game changing for me, every morning I wake up, the first thing I do is I dance. That's it. I just dance to one song. And I know it might sound a bit lame to people or, whatever, but actually the way it just primes my energy, my mind, I move my body, it's great. And when I first started, fine, I maybe did it like just for 1 minute and then you build it up. But really, when you go super small and you build and build and build, it compounds exponentially. Like exponentially, and it's amazing. And there's a really great analogy that if a plane were to move 1 degree different every hour, it would be in a completely different destination. And in the same way, that's like for us. Think of your life in degrees, like tiny, tiny little things. So rather than being like, okay, right, tomorrow, I need to have like the perfect boundaries. I need to never react to my kids or my partner. That's just it's not going to be very sustainable. So think, okay, how can I just at dinner, be more present with my kids? How can I at dinner just put my phone away? Or how can I, when I wake up in the morning, just say one useful thought to myself, and that's it. I'll do it for 30 days, go really, really small. So the compounding effect is really important, because one of the quickest ways to lose your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-worth is that you don't keep those promises to yourself. And most of us are doing that. Whether it's, I need to ring my friend, or, okay, I'll go to the gym today, or let me eat a bit more healthy. When we don't keep those promises and they keep racking up, we just slowly lose that trust in ourselves. And that's a problem. My motto is just do one thing for your body, one thing for your mind, one thing for your soul. That's it, no matter how small it is. And just watch how the direction of your life can change, but also just how you feel about yourself. And one thing I just wanted to add with the point you said before, a lot of people will come to me saying, Maya, I want to be more positive. I just want a positive mind. I want positive thoughts. And that's fine. But it's actually, it's pretty impossible to have only positive thoughts as a human. I think even reframing that to be, how can I build a more positive relationship with my mind? It's so subtle, but so important, because we often force ourselves to never have a negative thought, or like we're not allowed to feel sad or angry. But that's actually, I think it's the joy of being human. We get to feel this whole experience, the great things, the harder things. And so again, it's not about pushing the mind to only be positive. It's about how can I have a more positive relationship with my mind and my body. That's really where the power lies.
It's a really important distinction, isn't it?
On that, I always say to my clients when they do come in, because I loved this and I heard it from a supervisor of mine. She was like, never encourage anyone to put whipped cream on garbage. Never encourage a positive affirmation or a positive reframe until you know what's underneath that. And I think that's just it's a beautiful, because it's such a clear visual example and a question mark of, am I doing that in my life? And maybe I do need to look at some of this garbage and find some of the good stuff in here so that I can actually pair it with this whipped cream, and it's great. But we're no longer putting it on top of the garbage bin.
Absolutely. I do think the idea that we need to be good vibes only all the time is unsustainable, isn't it? And, also it might mean that we then get into a stage where we're bypassing a little bit. We're ignoring the bad stuff and we're just pretending everything's fine. But ultimately, that is not going to help us move to where we want to be. And the reason we're having this conversation is because lots of people are struggling with negative thoughts. The statistic from Mind shows that 1 in 4 people every year are going to experience mental health issues of some kind, whether they be the kinds of mental health issues that mean you're anxious, or whether they're actually stopping you from showing up for work, being with friends and family, or putting you in a situation where you might be a danger to yourself. That's some serious stuff. So talking about therapy, talking about ways in and the way that you both work and ways that people can access these sorts of modalities and thought processes is really, really important. I also think that the more we lean into it, the better for us. But there is a stigma still, and we do notice that in some cases, people are throwing around words like snowflake or oversensitive, and maybe accusing, especially younger generations, of being over-therapized. We're using this therapy speak. We're constantly defining ourselves by doing the work. People get criticized for being too into it. I think personally that is unfair, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because there's almost a sort of backlash to people who want to do better for themselves in that way, isn't there?
I don't in any way think that younger generations are over-therapized. I think that they are growing up, and I witnessed this being a therapist during the time of COVID, watch them developmentally miss milestones. And because they have missed those developmental milestones, there's a consequence for that. There's been a consequence on all of us. And I think it's actually quite amazing that they are a generation that is willing to say, this doesn't feel right. The story that I've been told of success doesn't interest me. The systems around me, my parents don't look well. That person doesn't. The earth is literally on fire here, and you're telling me to breathe? I really applaud them for that. And specifically in the UK, hold a lot of space that there is still this stigma and there is this judgment. And I put more of the responsibility of that barrier being broken down, not on young people, but on the institutions and how psychotherapy is trained specifically in this country. I think it can be done a lot better, a lot differently. I think there's things that can be pulled from the North American model that can modernize it and make it more user-friendly and more inviting and invitational to people that typically wouldn't access it.
I think you offer a great solution there. And it's a lot more than I was expecting when I asked you, what do you think about this idea that younger people are perhaps self-indulgent? Because we do need solutions. We are seeing a mental health crisis, a loneliness crisis, and not just with young people, across the entire spectrum of the UK's population. Maya, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on the idea that, people are perhaps over-therapized, or, they're too sensitive, because you teach resilience, right?
It's interesting. I think my generation we're very complex. And I think it's so good that we are talking about things more and more and more, and it opens such great conversation. And we also have access to really interesting solutions, therapies. Like, I think you can get so much from books as well, and articles, and, you know, genuine interviews and pieces of these experts. I just think it's how we go about finding the solution. So I did a poll on my Instagram. This was maybe like at the beginning of the year. And I did the poll being like, let's say you were struggling in life and you could take this pill and tomorrow you could feel so much better and like be really happy with your mind, etc. Or the second option was you do like a type of coaching or therapy for, let's say 3 or 4 years. So it required 3 or 4 years before you got there. And it was 94% pick the pill. And I think it was interesting because we don't see mental health or mental fitness like physical health or physical fitness yet. We kind of expect it to be this thing like, okay, let's just do this for like a few months or weeks and then we should be good. Or, you know, there's a lack of like, I guess, empowerment of like, I'm going to do this for myself. My mind is half my health, just like I move my body, just like I, you know, have a membership to the gym. It's a maintenance thing. And it's, you know, the way you think, feel, and perform dominates your entire life. And I always say that with mental health, there's a bit of a, I guess, a spectrum where you're either, you know, you've got really bad mental health, which may lead to mental illness, or you've got pretty good mental health, which means, okay, cool, you're mentally fit, so you're actively maintaining it. But then you also have mental weakness in life where, you know, we're human. You might have a tiring day or something might have happened. Naturally, you're not going to be at your best state. And I think it's just about being proactive by thinking, you know what, training your mind, being mentally attractive, managing your emotions, knowing how to build your resilience is so damn sexy. I think it's the best thing anyone can do for themselves. But it's not a hack. And it's not a short-term fix. It's something that is a lifelong journey. And it's actually one of the most incredible journeys to go on. And I think a lot of people, when, you know, they see that, okay, I'm a mental fitness expert, they're like, oh, wow, her mind must be like perfect. Absolutely not. Oh my gosh, no. I have negative thoughts. I go into my spirals. I sometimes struggle with emotions. But at least now I have the tools that can help me out of them. And that means I don't have to judge myself, and it means I don't have to suppress them. So I don't think we're over-therapized. I think it's just how we are seeking those solutions and how we're actually implementing it into our lives, because that's really what matters the most.
I love that. And I also think the fact that you touched on it being a lifelong process is really interesting, because Ailey was just saying we get 6 sessions on the NHS of mental health support. So at what point do we know if we've had enough? At what point do we know how much we need? Personally, I agree with you. I see this as a lifelong pursuit of a healthy mind. But if someone has a few sessions and then cycles off and then feels like, actually, I've got what it takes right now, I'm fine for the time being, I can start this again whenever I need to. Someone else might take a completely different approach and say, no, I need this forever. Do you think that, you know, it's possible to complete therapy? Can you get to the point where there's a finish line? Or is it something that you are going to be doing consistently or on and off, maybe for the rest of your life?
To answer that question, I think it's important to bring in just the scope of individual difference. Some people are really inclined to explore their own inner world and have evolution and development, and they love personal growth, and like that's their sweet spot. They're like, yummy. And some people are like, I want that development and growth in business or my creative practices. So that's deeply going to influence, and I don't think we give that as much kind of weight when we talk about therapy being ongoing. How I was trained, and I still hold this in my training, is a sign of actually really good work is my client outgrowing me. I have led them to those places. They have explored those things, and they have gone, actually, in this dynamic with Ailey, I don't get to explore this one part of me. And I want to explore that part. And so they go somewhere else. Let that be another therapist, let that be a practice, let that be coaching, whatever that is. And so I in the UK, there is more of this narrative of like, I stay in therapy for a really long time and I have my practitioner and we spend decades together. That isn't much of a North American narrative. We do value long-term work, and there's a lot that you can get out of that. But we also value that each therapist is a different person. It's a different relationship. They're meeting you at a different point in their life. And so you'll have a different experience. And we kind of more encourage our clients into that right off the start, from what I've heard and what I've experienced here in the UK, which is more like the psychoanalytical tradition of we stay and we keep meeting at the same time every week until the end of time, because that is our time together, which is a different practice. In completing therapy, I think, and I always empower my clients with these questions of, let's go back to your goals. What led you here? Okay, let's check on them every 6 months. Are those the same goals? Have you got those pieces? Do you have new goals? And so I weave that in, so we're not just in this relationship that could go on for time immemorial. We have something very specific and a clear focus. And I really empower my clients that you have one precious life. There are 1,000 ways to grow and develop. This is one practice. Maybe it's your growth and your development here led you to want to go practice your growth and development somewhere else. And I always really softly encourage that to ensure that we don't end up with dependency. Because, we're not here to depend on anyone. Therapy is supposed to be a practice where you do cultivate a capacity for interdependence, not independence. This isn't you on an island out there. It's actually, I know how to relate with people in a supportive way. And I know that there's some more support out there if I lose some of that support as well.
Ultimately, we want to feel happier, more confident, more capable, don't we? Able to just get on and move through life in the way that makes us feel safe. But yeah, I agree. I think, there's perhaps a different way of doing it here to other places, but there's probably no right way to do it. It's got to be a personal journey. Mm-hmm. And speaking of personal journeys, I do want to ask you a little bit about your personal habits. So my final question for you both is, what is your one wellness non-negotiable? What's the personal habit for you that you could not live without when it comes to your health and wellness?
I guess I'm slightly biased here, but mine has to be visualization. Yeah, I've been doing it for now about 8 years. For me, I think the number one thing I'll do with visualization is every day I wake up, I spend time to just close my eyes, and I will intentionally mentally rehearse who I want to be today, how I want to show up. Because I think your character is something no one can take away from you. And so many of us are on autopilot. We do the same habits, the same thought patterns. It's just also automatic and habitual. So we want to tell our brain, prime our brain, hey, I want to walk into a room like this today. I want to feel like this. And at least it gives you the best chance of doing that. So I'd say definitely visualization and mental rehearsal. But I have to just add one more, which I add in anyway to it. Every night, every single night before I go to bed, I'll always tell myself, Maya, you're just not grateful enough. Because I'm a very grateful person. Like, I'm super grateful. But that one statement just reminds me to find that one more thing, no matter how stressful my day is. Maya, you're not grateful enough. It will force me to even just find, okay, I had a nice dinner. I can breathe. My dog is sitting there, whatever it is. And it's a little bit intense for people, but you know what? It works for my mind, and it always allows me to go to bed knowing that I'm feeling more grateful as I do that. So those are my two that are non-negotiable.
I do that too. Every night before bed.
Oh, I love it.
I remind myself to just remember how lucky I am.
Yeah, exactly.
And it does really help me focus on the positives.
Yeah.
What about you, Ailey? What's your wellness non-negotiable?
Mine is a practice that I have throughout my day. And it definitely comes from my training, but also I know the importance of our breath. And so for me, it's constantly noticing the sensations around my ribcage. We know that our breath is our nervous system's fastest regulator. If we want to get into that parasympathetic state and actually experience some of that calm or the rest and digest, get out of that anxious mind, it is to consciously breathe. And so that is my go-to, is to constantly throughout the day be checking in with my body, the sensations that are inside, the tightness, and using my breath as something to modulate my nervous system, because it changes my prefrontal cortex, it changes my capacity to connect to you, it actually changes my vocal tone to be more soothing, which will then People respond differently to me. And so there's lots of fun little neuroscience reasons, but also more than anything, it just makes me more present and more available, and it reconnects me to my heart. And you don't have to pay for it. It's not something you need to like shame or judge yourself into. We all have moments where we catch ourselves holding our breath. And so it can just be slowly and very gracefully just added into your day as your awareness of your body grows.
I love that. Breathwork really is the one, isn't it? And it's becoming more and more popular, and I love to see it. And I suppose breathing and checking in with the body, that is all part of the practice of somatics, right? Which is something that you're an expert in. I wonder if you can explain that a little bit, because it is fascinating and something that maybe more people should know about.
Absolutely. So as a somatic psychologist, I have a master's degree in somatic studies, in addition to all the other degrees you need to be a psychologist. And why I chose somatics is because it really looks and it trains you to observe the physiology of the body in front of you, because we know physiology informs psychology. So one of the ways that a somatic psychologist is different is we observe your breath pattern. We observe where you're bracing in your body. We observe, okay, are you walking in the room and your shoulders are hunched in? Are you overexerted out? Because this is going to tell us really useful information on your nervous system. And we have all experienced some form of adversity or overwhelm. And those forms of adversity or overwhelm shape our nervous system. And they shape our nervous system to maybe shut down and collapse or be more anxious. And that all lives in the body and then changes our fascia. So the connective tissues that hold everything together, it shapes how they're held. And so somatic psychology, we're looking at the physiology of the body. We're still listening to the story our client is telling us, but we're also watching for congruence. Are the words you're saying to me about how you feel actually resonate and mirror what's going on in your nervous system? Or are you sitting there telling me that your week was perfect and your hand is like shaking and you're like, what's going on over there? You're tapping, or you're telling me you're happy and I'm like, I haven't seen you take a full breath in the past 45 minutes and you're saying everything is fine. Like clearly something is not fine. And so we ask these more provocative questions around, I noticed your affect change. What's going on over there? Did you notice that you haven't made eye contact with me in the past 30 minutes? You don't have to look at me. Actually, I'll look away so we can maintain not having eye contact, but just observe what that is. And so somatics really honors that our past history, our own individually, collectively, and intergenerationally, lives in the nervous system. And it honors that for us to change our psychology, our body needs to complete its stress response cycle. So we need to change the activation level in our nervous system. And so we are typically trained in the classic clinical way. We hit all those boxes, and then we have this additional training that really roots in the mind-body connection, honoring that, our gut microbiome and our brain are constantly in communication, and we bring that into the practice of therapy.
I think that is fascinating and also so interesting, because we've talked a lot about mental health, we've talked a lot about being in our heads, but we do forget that, we are a whole system of processes, aren't we? So what's going on up here is also being reflected in the whole body.
One of my favorite little stats that I always throw out there is we know that the mind takes in 0.00001% of the information around us. Your fascia and your body, your gut microbiome, your interoceptive, everything else is being absorbed by the body. And so when we think of trauma, it's also like, okay, in that incident, I have these memories, but this whole system has a whole other collective memory response there too. And that's influencing your life. And so that statistic is obviously rough because it's really hard to get the raw data to be like, this is exactly the number. But I love it because it starts to open up this conversation around my mental health is impacted by things my mind doesn't even hold. And so if I want to improve this or have a different experience in my mental health, I actually have to start opening up my mind and start letting go of these ideas I have, because there's lots of things that I don't know, and that there's kind of this great mystery inside of me. And in that way, therapy can kind of feel like an adventure, which is why I love somatics, because we are on an adventure of the unknown and of the body.
Absolutely. And it's great that you mentioned adventure, because what I wanted to ask you, Maya, is if you would take us on one of your little mental adventures, because you do visualization in such a fascinating way. I wonder if you could help us tap in and do a visualization together that people listening at home or watching at home can also do with us?
Yeah, okay, I will do that. I was actually going to ask, how do you think our nervous systems are? Have you been observing them?
I was worrying about the way I was
Yeah,
sitting.
I was like, oh, because you know when you said the shoulder thing, I was like, oh, I'm doing this. Okay, so this actually links really well. So this is a creative visualization, and it's used to essentially make intangible sensations in your body tangible. So it can be used for emotions, pain, disease, injury, whatever it might be. And this really comes from medicine. So have you seen the film Inside Out?
Yes.
Yeah, so kind of use that as a bit of inspiration. So whether it's a character, whether it's an animal, shape, anything. And we'll do it for maybe like an uncomfortable emotion that you either frequently feel or that you felt in the past, or maybe you might be feeling it right now, or there's just a bit of tension. Okay, so close your eyes for me. Okay, let's just take one deep breath, breathing in. And exhale through the mouth. Okay, and just keep breathing in a rhythm that works for you. And I want you to take a moment to just think about something in your life right now that's maybe creating an emotional response. Might be a bit of discomfort. Maybe it's something from the past, a bit of worry, frustration, fear. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it just might be tension in the body. And I want you to tune in to where you feel it in the body. Whether it's the chest, could be some tightness, maybe it's the gut, a bit of like a heaviness there. Maybe it's a full body thing. Just become really curious, where do I feel this sensation or emotion? Now, instead of suppressing this or running away from it or avoiding it, we're going to make this into a shape or a color or a character. So I want you to get creative, use your imagination, and I want you to visualize what this emotional sensation looks like as an object, a character, an animal, a shape. Just be really creative. It might be like a red fire. It's like really hot. Or it could be like a roaring lion. Maybe it's like a green snake or some ropes. Find an image that aligns and just sit with it for a moment. If it needs to get bigger, hotter, colder, tighter, let it. Feel the emotion to heal it. And now, with your mind, slowly, we're going to start to dissolve this image. And again, be creative. Do you need to pour water over it? Do you need to kick it? Do you want to play with it? Maybe it just gets smaller and smaller on its own, but use your mind to help you. And so keep going until it's now the size of a tiny, tiny pea. It's so small. Good, and take one more deep breath now in through the nose. As you exhale, let it fully dissolve. And just feel that lightness, that space, that openness in your body. And you can open your eyes.
That was great. All my worries melted away.
It's not magic, but yeah, you might feel a bit calmer, lighter. I used to do so much in hospital for pain, but again, this was like a little bit of a sped up version. I'd ask you to spend a little bit more time just exploring. But it's so great for kids as well. Do it with your kids. They love it. They can start to understand and be playful with their emotions as well.
The power of the imagination there is actually a lot stronger than maybe we think, right? Yeah. Because often I don't close my eyes and start imagining things in the way that I just did, but anyone can do it.
Most people do use their imagination, but there's this one saying that it's super interesting. So worry is the misuse of imagination. Because we're always imagining worst case scenarios, things going wrong or us failing or stuff from the past. And whatever you repeat, you get good at. So if you can be intentional with your imagination, it can really take you anywhere.
Have a bit more fun with it. Thank you so much for talking us through that. That was amazing. And also, I've learned so much just in this conversation with you both. So I'm so grateful to you for your expertise and for joining me on the sofa today. If you are interested in learning more about what Maya does, then you can read her book, Visualize, which is now available in all good bookshops and online. And if you're interested in learning more about somatics, self-care and therapy, you can look up Ailey's practice and listen to her podcast, In This Body. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Well Enough. We'll see you next time, and in the meantime, stay well. Just a note to say that if you are struggling, please consider speaking to your GP or navigate to any of the free resources included in the show notes.